The oldest genre of video game in existence is the shooter. While some people might argue about what should count as the first real video game, the biggest names in the early history of the genre all involved spaceships and shooting. And none were bigger, nor had as big an impact than 1978's Space Invaders, the first real shoot-'em-up game. Since that time, we've seen hundreds upon hundreds of variations and evolutions of the shmup. Just last year, we saw incredible releases across every major gaming platform available. But with any genre as long-standing as this, there are bound to be games that we don't get to play. Some that may have been lost to time. Some may have been cancelled, while others still are simply waiting out there to be discovered. In this video, I'll show you 5 mysterious, lost, and forgotten shmups. Some of these stories have happy endings, some have sad endings, and some have no ending at all. So let's dig in and learn about 5 pieces of shmup lost media. And who knows, maybe you can help in the search to find them. Ubisoft is a massively popular AAA developer known for the Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rayman series of games. Well, they used to be known for Rayman. He's kind of been put out to pasture, hasn't he? However, Ubisoft wasn't always this juggernaut, as they've actually been around since 1986. In the early 90s, Ubisoft had yet to create a major hit, and arguably wouldn't until 1995's Rayman for the Atari Jaguar, Sega Saturn, and Sony PlayStation. Ubi was mostly focused on PC gaming in the late 80s, but as the 90s came to be, the company started dipping its toes into development for platforms like the NES, SNES, and Game Boy. It was at this time that the developer Frederick Hood joined the company. While Frederick would go on to co-create Rayman with Michel Ancel, he initially came to Ubisoft with a pitch for a Sega Mega Drive shmup based off of Star Rush, a game his friend had developed for Amiga, Atari ST, and PC. Frederick's pitch was accepted and he was given the funds to develop the project. Turns out, he and his graphic designer Laurent Cluzel actually finished the game 100%. So why wasn't it released? Well, by the time Zodiac was ready for release, another game had come out that seemed to scare the pants off of Ubisoft executives. Thunder Force 4. It seems that the sheer mind-blowing quality of Thunder Force 4, partnered with the high cost of Sega cartridge production, and the Genesis nearing the end of its life cycle, convinced Ubisoft to save money and simply cancel the release. The ROM of the game is still in Frederick Hood's hands, and he's teased us with the title screen on his YouTube channel. He even claims that he may someday dump it, but it's been 30 years and we still don't even have a screenshot. So it looks like this one will remain a mystery for a while. If you're a shooter fan, the name Hiroshi Iuchi likely needs no introduction. Iuchi is a graphic designer who worked at Konami in the 80s and 90s until he and some of his coworkers left Konami to found Treasure. Iuchi worked on many things during his time at Treasure, but his first directing gig was on Radiant Silvergun, the studio's first pure shmup. After that, he directed the critical darling Ikaruga, as well as the fantastic Gradius 5. It's clear Iuchi has a passion for shmups. In 2012, Iuchi directed Kokuga with G-Rev, a top-down shooter with tank controls that released exclusively on the 3DS eShop. Now, as an aside, Kokuga was an alright game, but also had a little bit of mystery to it. You see, Kokuga is the only game I am aware of that was not made available for purchase in Canada. I live in Canada, so I actually had to jump through some sketchy hoops to get this game. but most Canadians just could not download it. G-Rev and Yuichi never gave a clear answer as to why this happened beyond a vague, "We were informed very late in the preparation process that the game would not be able to be sold there as is." For what it's worth, this has never happened before to any other game, and it wasn't a language issue. This was simply never clarified or rectified. Enough of that tangent. In 2014, Yuichi partnered with M2 to announce a brand new shmup for PlayStation 4, Ubusuna. This was a somewhat strange announcement, as Yuichi mentioned that he had been working on the game for about a year, and initially called the project 50YW. But in the announcement, he said that he built a prototype and changed the mechanics so much that the world he designed for 50YW had to be scrapped and replaced with a new story, and it's now called Ubusuna. The plan was for this to be a PS4 digital release, and back in 2014, the PS4 was a hot new piece of tech, so this was pretty exciting news. A new PS4 shmup from the Ikaruga creator working with M2? That's fantastic. But then there was a long period of silence. A 5-year period of silence. That was only broken thanks to some tidbits in an issue of Dengeki PlayStation. The details were sparse and frankly not too promising. It mentioned that the game has Ikaruga-like attributes, but is different in that vectors are 180 degrees. What does that even mean? It also mentioned stuff like, the graphics are incomplete, the concept of the title is to show the nature of the creator, and development will still take a bit of time. Yuichi even shared a haiku that translates as, "Ubusuna is finally getting released during the end of the hardware's lifecycle, lol." Even Naoki Hori chimed in and said, "While Ubusuna is in a rough state, it is nearly playable, and we are currently creating assets as best we can." Hold on a second, nearly playable after 5 years of development? That can't be right. And that was the only update we got for another 3 years, until M2 finally made another announcement. They revealed the player ships, released some music, and a wall of text description for the story of the game. Still, no gameplay footage whatsoever, but you can see the models for the player ships moving in what might be a game engine with a skybox. A recent M2 Shot Triggers stream had Yuichi on to discuss the game, where he revealed that the game had changed designers earlier this year, and that the game's mechanical design, modeling, and art were completely scrapped and redone from scratch in January of 2022. At this point, it's hard to know if Ubusuna really will be finished, but this most recent update did show more than the past two combined, so I'd like to think that maybe someday this will release. However, it's clear that so many versions and prototypes of the game were built and scrapped multiple times over the 8 years that the game has been in development. And this means that whatever version of Ubusuna we may end up getting will be completely different from the Ubusuna that was announced all those years ago. We also have no idea why it's taking this long to development, and why design and art have had two complete revamps while we haven't seen anything in terms of gameplay. In 2016, M2 announced that they would be publishing a series of games under a new brand called M2 Shot Triggers. The goal of this series was to bring classic shmups to modern platforms, with the M2 Shot Triggers team paying exhaustive and incredibly close attention to detail, accuracy, features, and gadgets. The M2 Shot Triggers series has become incredibly famous among shmup fans for the extremely high quality of their releases. Some of the biggest and most important all-time classics have been released through this line, and even games like Darius Cosmic Collection were assisted by the M2 Shot Triggers team. They recently announced a Dodonpachi Daiojo release for 2023, and I really can't wait. But going back in time, their first release was Battle Garega Rev 2016, followed by Dangun Feveron that same year. The following year, M2 announced 2 more games. One was an M2 Shot Triggers version of Ketsui, and the other was a game called Feveron School, a project being produced by Doki Doki Majo Shinpan series alum Yoshiyasu Matsushita and Satoru Hasegawa. The game is supposedly a mix of visual novel and arcade gameplay, with the player attending a school where the student characters are personifications of Dangun Feveron's ships. And apparently, this game was going to help you learn how to play Dangun Feveron. Does this mean that it has a copy of Dangun Feveron inside the game that you can play? Is it trying to encourage people to try the M2 Shot Triggers version of Dangun Feveron? It's not really clear. Frankly, the game sounds absolutely insane, and it seems really weird to base an entire visual novel on, frankly, one of Cave's least popular games, but that's what this is. The sad part, well, this is about all we know about the game. In 2019, M2 stated that it was still being worked on, but they showed no gameplay or any meaningful updates. It's been 5 years since the announcement, and with Dangun Feveron pretty far in the rear window of even the most ardent shmup fans, I'm not sure we can count on this ever coming out. Which is a shame, because I would love to know what on earth it even is. One of the most famous and notorious lost shmups, Dodonpachi Campaign, is an arranged version of Dodonpachi, Cave's second arcade game, and notable as one of the earliest bullet hell games. This version features altered color palettes, harder enemy placement, and overall increased bullet speed and difficulty, but most importantly, adds the ability to enter hyper mode, very similar to what would appear in the sequel game, Dodonpachi Daiojo. For this, the game is actually kinda historically important as a development stepping stone towards what is considered one of the best shmups of all time. However, Dodonpachi Campaign was given away to a small number of players who submitted their scores to a high score contest that Cave put on to promote the Saturn port of Dodonpachi. These players received their own personalized PCB. Unfortunately, no one that received a copy of the game, or has one now, has ever dumped the game ROM. And while Cave has showed the game as recently as 2006 at the Cave Matsuri, it has never been uploaded or officially released. We don't even know how many of these PCBs exist. At this point, we are essentially waiting on the good graces of some hero to rescue this lost classic from obscurity. Who knows? Maybe someday M2 Shot Triggers will do a Dodonpachi port and magically announce they're releasing the campaign version, similar to how they did the first console port of G Darius version 2. But that's merely a pipe dream. For our last entry, let's share a story with a more positive ending. Athena was a Japanese video game developer active in the 1990s. They worked on the PS1 version of Clock Tower and the sound driver for the Sega Genesis version of Ultraman, as far as I could find. But not much else that people would recognize or know. Before I talk about Dino Force, I would like to tell a really strange story about their first game. Their first PC Engine game, Circus Lido, is a notorious and mysterious game in and of its own right. The game released in 1991 after appearing in PC Engine magazines for a while, but oddly enough, when the game officially released, no one could find a copy, and it drifted into obscurity until years later, when the PC Engine collecting scene had deemed it an incredibly rare and hidden gem worth paying thousands of dollars for. However, in the year 2000, Amazon Japan started selling brand new copies of Circus Lido for its original retail price of 5,400 yen. This definitely took the wind out of the sails of those who spent thousands on the game. Turned out the game wasn't sold in toy or video game shops, but bookstores of all places. This explains why the game was so rare, as the dead stock was undoubtedly brought back to the publisher, since who the hell goes to a bookstore to buy a video game? That dead stock turned up on Amazon Japan and the game's value deflated. That brings me to the company's would-be second PC Engine game, Dino Force. Dino Force is a horizontal shmup that was announced in PC Engine magazines in 1991. The game was never given a release date, and while magazines like Gekkan PC Engine and PC Engine Fan carried the title for a few years, eventually it disappeared. We don't know what happened to the game, but the Lost Media Wiki claims the game was intended for a release in bookstores just like Circus Lido. If that's true, it could very well be the reason it got cancelled, as Circus Lido was certainly a commercial failure. Now, I won't get into the full nitty-gritty of this game's story. Check the Lost Media Wiki for a play-by-play. But prototype ROMs appeared and disappeared over the years, being sold at auctions for thousands upon thousands of dollars. Some of the game developers actually showed off prototype ROMs at events for people to try. But in 2022, one of these prototype ROMs, owned by its original developer, Tokuhisa Tajima, was sold to a French collector named Alex Seimondo. Seimondo didn't slink away into the dark like a lot of collectors of this type. He actually partnered up with Mark Van Workom and Chris Koval, and put in the work to iron out the bugs, rebalance, and finish the game. The PC Engine site PCEworks then not only produced actual hue cards of the game that you can buy right now, they also hosted the ROM for anyone to download for free. While the original prototype versions may be lost, the fact that some dedicated fans found this game and got it up and running after 30 years of mystery is absolutely incredible. There's still one mystery to solve though, and that's why are there no dinosaurs in a game called Dino Force? Anyways, that's been 5 pieces of Shmup Lost Media. Are there any other pieces of Lost Media that you'd like me to cover? Whether it's shmups or just retro video games in general? Sound off in the comments and let me know what you think of these.